This is Goss's Garage with Pat Goss, co-host of PBS's Motor Week. He'll take your calls and comments now at 844-885-4677 or email him at radio@goss-garage.com. And now, Pat Goss.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Goss's Garage. I'm Pat Goss. Like the announcer says, if you would like to talk about cars, give me a call, 844-885-4677. You know, when we think that we've got all of the maintenance and everything nailed down on our cars, there's something new that comes along that we need to pay attention to and maintain. Now, as a case in point, Heather and I were talking about a problem she had with the key fob in her 17 VW Beetle Dune, which made me think about all the other key questions I've been getting. Even though Heather's car is only a few months old, she had a no key detected message on the instrument cluster and the car wouldn't start. Now, like many cars today, her V-Dub has a passive unlock and start system. See, the key can stay in the driver's pocket or purse, and simply touching the door handle unlocks the car. Then all you do is push a button on the console to start the car. Pretty slick and now becoming almost standard equipment on new cars. Also, Mike in Cedar Rapids says his Ford has a keyless system and he can't get the door to unlock. Now, Mike wants to know how to get into one of these cars when the fob is dead. All right, let's start with Heather. In Heather's case, although it was almost new, the battery in the key fob was dead. Now, how could that be? Well, these systems are working all the time the key is close to or inside the car. They aren't like the old fobs where the battery was only working when one of the buttons was being pushed. So battery life can be significantly shorter than in the past. Now, it would be a good idea on a keyless car to make replacing batteries in your key fob a once every year part of servicing your car. Hey, just do it when you replace the batteries in your smoke detectors. Also, if you have any issues with range or sensitivity of the key, replace the battery as the first step in diagnosing your problem. Now, some cars have one battery while others have two. Some fobs will be easy to open, and others will require an act of Congress to open. Read your owner's manual to learn how to replace batteries in yours, and do it before your fob dies. See, a dead key fob and your manual securely locked inside the car could ruin your day. If the battery in your fob dies, you won't be able to touch the door handle to unlock the car. Also, if the fob is dead but the door is unlocked, you can get inside, but the car won't start. So what do? Well, before that happens, and it will, sooner or later, it would again be a good idea to study your owner's manual for instructions on what to do and how to do it. Fact is, every one of these keyless cars has a way to unlock the door and start them, even when the fob is dead. Most will have a small trim piece at the back of the driver's door handle. That can be removed, usually with a key hidden inside the fob. But you need to know how to access the hidden key and what to do with it once you have it in hand. That will get you into the car, but next you need to know how to start your car with a dead fob. Again, all cars have procedures, but some are really bizarre, so you might never figure them out without reading your owner's manual. Things like holding the key up against the steering column in an exact position, or laying the key in one of the cup holders in a certain way, or maybe touching the dead fob against the start button, then pushing the button to start the car. Lots of tricks, so it would be smart to know what to do before you have the problem. Also, be careful about internet loonies because they can be really stupid, like suggesting jacking the car up and using a jump box to jumper the car's electrical system rather than simply removing the trim piece to open the locked door. Careful with that one. as one slip and you just blew a couple grand. So there we have it. You know, these keyless cars. Keep the fob in your pocket. Mine is that way and works well. But the thing that you have to keep in mind, lots of times there will be stupid things that happen that drain the battery. Like on Heather's VW, for instance, what we found out, why her key fob, the battery went dead so quickly, was that she parks the car in the garage in the bay that is next to, on the other side of the wall, is the laundry room. Well, she'd come in her little tray there, she'd put her keys in the tray, and believe it or not, even though it's 10 or 12 feet or 15 feet, whatever it might be, between the laundry room where she was putting her keys and her car, what was happening was that it was close enough that as long as the battery was strong, it was still communicating with the car. See, these things communicate all the time. Even when they're within any kind of range of the car, they're talking back and forth to the car. And that tells the car that the key is in place and that it's all right to respond to certain commands like touching the door handle to open the door and so on. So her keys were sitting there 24/7 communicating with the car, and over time that caused the battery in the key fob to go dead. So I did some research on this, and I found a lot of different things on the internet, some of them really good about replacing batteries and opening the doors and different things like that. And then these fruitcake ideas, like this guy that tells everybody that the best way to get one of these cars open, jack it up. Now, granted, he uses a floor jack, no jack stands, nothing like that, no jack stands, and then he slides under the car without any jack stands to protect his silly ass. And, you know, if something goes wrong with the jack, he's going to be crushed like a bug on your windshield. Then he gets this rig with a booster box, a battery box, booster box, wires some wires into it, and then gets up underneath the car and with poor lighting says, now here's where you touch. Well, you can't see where you touch, and if you touch the wrong place, of course, you could short out one of the dozen or more computers on the car, and then you're going to be really in trouble. Or if you touch something that is grounded, then the wire that you're using to touch it could get hot almost instantly and get a serious burn. You know, just crazy stuff. And the car that he was working on has one of these little covers on the back of the door handle, and all you do with it is that you simply take the hidden key out of the key fob, and there's a little hole in the bottom of the cover. You push that up in there, the cover slides off, and you got a normal, ordinary, everyday, old-fashioned lock in there. You take the hidden key, you put it in the lock, you turn it, unlock the door, open the door, and get on with life. I don't understand people. It seems that some of the things that we're putting on the internet these days is bringing ignorance up to an art form, because it is just so ridiculous and so very ignorant. All right, anyway, so much for that. But remember these key fobs. If you have push-button start in your car and touch the door handle or push a button on the door handle to unlock it or lock it, and if anything starts getting funky, put a new battery in the fob and do it once a year anyway, whether anything is going wrong or not. Believe me, it'll save you a lot of aggravation. All right. Jay Says, I have a 2003 Chrysler, and Jay is U.S. Army retired. First, thank you, Jay, for your service. Says, I have a 2003 Chrysler Voyager, 3.3-liter dual overhead cam flex fuel. The issue is that when I go to start the van, I have to pump the gas pedal several times before it'll start. Okay, I never had to do that since I purchased the van new. About 2 years ago, I replaced the fuel pump. The van runs good after it starts. Less than 100K miles on the engine. Could it be a crankshaft or camshaft position sensor, or possibly mass airflow position sensor? As always, your professional advice is greatly appreciated. I enjoy your radio show. Well, Jay, first, I would not suspect any one of the sensors. That would be so far down my list that I wouldn't even consider it. Now, depending on what you did as far as the fuel pump is concerned, if you went to a parts store and bought the cheapest thing that you could find and just replaced the pump, then I would suspect that you have a bad part in the fuel tank. Now, how are we going to determine that? Well, the first thing we're going to do is, when we have one of these episodes, we're going to turn the key to the run position, not the start position, the run position. We're not going to engage the starter motor. Going to turn it to the run position, let it sit there for 2 seconds. 1/1000, 2/1000, turn it off. Wait 2 seconds. 1/1000, 2/1000. Turn it back to the run position. Wait 2 seconds, turn it off. Repeat this process 5 or 6 times. At no time during this will you engage the starter motor. If you do, the test is invalid. All right, so you have done this 5 or 6 times. Now you engage the starter motor, and if it starts right up, that tells you you have fuel leakage in the fuel system. All right, now what does that mean? Well, you see, when you start a modern car, you turn the key to the run position. As it goes through the run position, it engages a relay that turns the fuel pump on for 2 seconds to prime the fuel system. Now, this presumes that the fuel system is full of fuel. The fuel line and injectors and everything, there are no leaks, and everything has fuel in it. So what this is really doing is pressurizing the fuel system so that the injectors can work properly. All right, now, lots of times, because there's a check valve in the fuel tank that keeps this fuel from running out of the fuel line back into the fuel tank, that check valve will go bad. And when it does, the fuel drains out of the fuel line, back into the fuel tank, and 2 seconds worth of priming won't refill that fuel line, much less pressurize it. So by running it several times, each time you turn the key on, you're running that priming function of the fuel pump, and gradually, a little each time, it fills the fuel line until on the last one, the fuel line is filled and primed. Now you hit the key, starts right up. So the thing that you suspect in most cases like this is that the module in the fuel pump or the fuel tank is bad. So you've just proven that you have a problem here. Other ways that you could prove this is in a shop. You could use an exhaust gas analyzer, which would tell you when you crank the engine if you have either a rich or lean fuel mixture. If it's lean, it means that the fuel isn't draining into the engine. So you could drain into the engine through a bad fuel pressure regulator or through a leaky injector. So then with an exhaust gas analyzer, you would crank it, the engine wouldn't start, but you would have a rich fuel mixture, many thousands of parts per million of hydrocarbons. Now, on the other hand, if it's draining back into the tank and not into the engine, what you would have is a lean fuel mixture. You wouldn't see any fuel. Your hydrocarbon reading would be 0 or close to 0, and you would know that the fuel is draining away. You're not getting fuel at startup, and that it's not draining into the engine. So that's the way we go about testing them here in the shop. We use the key thing first in most cases, but you can do that. Anybody can do that one, and that tells you if it is a fuel-related problem or if it is something else, like one of these sensors or something like that. If it doesn't start after you've primed the pump 5, 6, 7 times, then you suspect that there is something electrical going on. But I would say 99.9 times out of 100 when we have conditions like this, that it is going to be a lack of fuel, not one of these sensors. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back on Goss's Garage. Oh, give me a call. 844-885-4677 is the number.
Stay tuned. Pat will take your calls next at 844-885-4677. Goss's Garage continues in a moment.
Folks, I'd like to take a moment to tell you about a car dealer that's near and dear to my heart. It's Mercedes-Benz of Annapolis. I've bought over 20 cars from them, but above and beyond that, there is one very special salesman that I always deal with. His name is Wayne Discus, and I would highly suggest you contact him if you're looking for a new Mercedes or used car. He can handle local and national sales. Check out Mercedes-Benz of Annapolis at mercedesofannapolis.com and meet Wayne Discus. Hey, be sure to tell Wayne Pat Goss sent you. mercedesofannapolis.com. This news and views is from Auto Care Pro magazine and deals with automatic transmissions. Although their story relates to an Audi that refused to shift, it could apply to most cars. In this case, the tech did all the proper preliminary tests, including a visual inspection of related parts, which revealed a badly corroded transmission computer. Seems someone had replaced the cabin air filter and didn't properly install its cover. Now, this allowed water to leak onto the computer, and over time the water caused corrosion and no shift. A new module made the Audi shift like new. The tech also reinstalled the cabin air filter cover properly. There are two primary lessons here. First, just because the symptoms are horrific doesn't mean the cause is horrific. In fact, seemingly huge problems may be cheap to fix. Second, this is a case where you'll probably be taken if you didn't pick a good shop. That's because you've already convinced yourself you need a major repair, and when the shop confirms what you suspect, you just go for it. This shop could have easily sold a completely unnecessary transmission, but instead was honest and saved the owner thousands of dollars. So select your shop carefully. Rather than just cheap, look for ASE certification, skill, quality, and above all, honesty. Too often the cheapest estimates come from shops with overall lower skill sets, or in some cases something much worse, more greed and less honesty.
This is Goss's Garage with Pat Goss. Call the show now at 844-885-4677.
For those of you enjoying Goss's Garage on TuneIn.com, please note our new show time every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. Also remember that number, 844-885-4677. You can call that 24/7. See, our line is up all the time, and you call in, you leave us a message, and we'll either call you back and put you on the air, or we will answer your question on the air, whatever you prefer. So leave us a callback number so that we can call you back, and we will see what we can do about solving your automotive problem. All right, now this is interesting. This is from Wayne. Wayne says, well, first, he says Ford Explorer SuperTrack, 195,000 miles. Now, I'm not sure what a SuperTrack is. I presume what Wayne is saying is that he has a Sport Track, which was a little sort of pickup truck affair that was built on a Ford Explorer that had the back of the cab cut off and so on. He says, I get 15.8 miles per gallon. I believe I should be getting over 20. I smell gas occasionally. It has the original spark plug wires. The spark plugs have not been changed in a long, long time. It starts hard most of the time, can turn over 10 to 15 times on occasion before it starts. The next time it starts instantly. All right, well, Wayne, first thing, I don't know what engine you have in this Explorer. But here are the rated numbers for the most economical one. So any other combination would be lower. Now, the most economical one is a 6-cylinder, and it is rated 13 miles per gallon in the city. Now, it's not a big vehicle, so it is a pig. I mean, just an absolute, utter pig on fuel. Highway of 18 miles per gallon. Normal combined for most drivers, 15 miles per gallon, or 6.7 gallons per 100 miles. All right, so your 15, according to the specs on the car, is dead where it should be. I don't know about this 20 miles per the gallon or better. We normally don't see older Explorers coming anywhere near that. They were horrible on gas. As a matter of fact, some of the V8s were actually better than the V6s in them. Now, as far as the hard starting goes, begin by checking the plugs and wires, followed by reviewing the computer data stream. Now, what you're looking for in a computer data stream, and this applies to all cars, there are certain things in the computer that are affected by temperature. Why that's important, we'll see in just a moment. Now, suppose you have one of these sensors that is out of spec. Things like, let's say the coolant temperature sensor. Not the one that gives you the reading on the dash, but the one that tells the computer how cold or how hot the coolant is. That sends a signal to the computer, and the computer uses that signal to determine how much fuel to mix with the air that's coming into the engine. Now, colder engines require more fuel. They have to have a more rich mixture to run than they do when the engine is heated up. So, if we have a coolant temperature sensor that is telling the computer that the coolant is colder than it really is, the computer is going to mix too much air with it. That might be while it's running, which is going to decrease fuel economy and perhaps decrease performance as well. Or during starting, it may make it hard to start because it's essentially flooding the engine. The other thing to look at is the inlet air temperature sensor. It senses the temperature of the air coming into the engine, and colder air has a different density than hot air and so on. So it uses this reading to determine how much fuel to mix again with the air. It's combining these readings. And of course, things like the mass airflow sensor. Mass airflow sensor tells the computer how much air is coming in. Now, if the mass airflow sensor isn't reporting that information properly, let's say it is telling the car's computer that it is getting 10 grams of air per second, where in reality it's getting 4, well, it's going to mix fuel relative to the 10-gram reading, not the 4 that's actually coming into the engine. Now that means you got too much fuel for the air, you got a rich mixture, car may be hard to start, and you may have poor fuel economy. So there's a lot of information in the data stream from any car's computer if you know how to read it. And that's where all of this craziness about codes and stuff like that, you know, you can see a lot of stuff in the data stream long before it ever generates a code. And even if it generates a code, you know, say we had a mass airflow sensor that was out of spec, we might get a code that talks about fuel mixture, not the mass airflow sensor. So you have to know how to interpret codes and how to go about testing them. So, you know, look at the data stream, learn what the data stream means, what the different numbers and what the different items do. All right, so that's how we would approach that one. All right, another email here. Pat, let's see, this is from Ed. Ed is from Maryland. I just reviewed your YouTube video on oil recommendations. We recently purchased a 2017 Fusion Hybrid, and Ford recommends a 10,000 mile interval on oil changes. I will use synthetic oil over the synthetic blend, which Ford recommends. Do you suggest this action? And also, if this was your car, would you follow the recommended 10,000 mile interval? All right, recommended 10,000 mile interval. This is something that really gets to me, because all of these owner's manuals give you a maximum. Now, I haven't seen any of my cars says that I can go 1 year or 10,000 miles between oil changes. But then there are all these footnotes. And it presumes that all of my driving is within certain parameters and so on. So in reality, what they are saying is not that you should go 10,000 miles. They are saying that you must not go past 10,000 miles under ideal circumstances. So, can you go the 10,000 miles? Well, if you're comfortable with it. And if you're only planning on keeping the car for 100,000 miles or so, no big deal. Just about any car will last with infrequent oil changes for that amount of time. But if you wanted to go the distance, see, a modern car typically can go 250,000, 500,000 miles, sometimes a lot more. But that requires that you step up things like oil change intervals. Now, on my cars, I change the oil typically between 6,000 and 7,000 miles, usually closer to 6. And I do that for a couple of reasons. Number one, I don't want to go much beyond 6,000 miles without rotating the tires. So I want to do everything at once. I don't want to have to bring it into the shop. Even though I own the shops, I don't want the inconvenience of bringing it in, putting it up in the air, doing things twice. So I want the tires rotated at no more than 6,000 miles. And that gives me the opportunity to rotate the tires, check the brakes, look at the various things underneath the car, and do the oil and filter change and all the different lubrication things at the same time. So that's what I recommend. Step up the oil change interval a little bit. Don't go the maximum that's allowed, and you will be amazed at how long one of these modern engines will run. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Give me a call, 844-885-4677.
Operators are standing by to take your call for Pat at 844-885-4677. Goss's Garage continues in a moment.
Think you'll pocket a lot more money if you sell rather than trade your car? Perhaps, but appearance sells cars, and your poor car is a bit grungy. There's dull paint, that ugly coffee stain on the seat, and a sweaty arm stain on the door, plus crumbs in every crack and crevice. Yep, when you look close, it's kind of ugly, and sadly for you, most used cars are bought on looks more than condition. That means a good cleanup job or pay a couple $100 to have it done. Next, because many used car buyers pull dipsticks and check fluids, you should clean the engine bay and change all the fluids. Buyers usually don't know what's good or bad, but someone on the internet says smart shoppers pull dipsticks, so buyers pull dipsticks, which often leads to questions about service and possible problems. Also, if the tires show any wear, buyers may assume there are worn front end parts. Don't forget the high cost of ads so people know it's for sale. And the questions. Is there a warranty? Will you take a trade? Is it inspected? Will you take a check? Can I give you $100 down and $100 a week? And so on. Now, a biggie. You might actually be risking your life, too. Where do you safely show a car so you don't have strangers eyeballing you and your home or trying to steal the car? When you look at the aggravation, work, expense, and dangers of selling a car, trading often looks really good. I get lots of air filter questions, and one of the most common deals with why air filters need to be replaced so often. Well, actually, they usually don't. Yet many drivers wind up buying a new air filter at every oil change, which is utterly ridiculous. Drivers say techs tell them if they don't buy a new air filter, they'll waste a lot of gas. Maybe that statement comes from ignorance or maybe dishonesty, but either way, you lose. Decades ago, dirty air filters did waste gas, but today, not so much. Cars now use a sensor to measure the air coming through the air filter, and computers to mix exactly the right amount of gas to match that air. So even though a dirty air filter reduces airflow into the engine, it doesn't affect gas mileage because the computer is always precisely matching fuel to the incoming air. In other words, a dirty filter means less air, and less air means less gas, so there's never an imbalance between air and fuel. Certainly when a filter gets really, really dirty, it can cause performance problems, but even then it may not affect gas mileage. So how long do air filters last? Unless you drive in really dusty conditions, air filters usually last 30 to 60,000 miles. Overselling of air filters is an enormous problem, and the best way not to be taken is to learn how to check your own air filter and check it twice a year.
Now, back to Goss's Garage with your host, Pat Goss.
All right, folks. Hey, please subscribe to Goss's Garage on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook. And for more car tips, tricks, and money-saving ideas, visit goss-garage.com. All right. Tim, who is a longtime friend of mine, works at Maryland Public Television, just like I do. Works on our Motor Week show from time to time. I hope this finds you well. I have a question about my '06 Highlander with the 2.5 liter engine. It sounds like I have a noisy lifter. It's worse in winter and eventually pumps up. Should I try something like BG's Quick Clean? Tim, if it were here in one of my shops, I would first verify that it is indeed a lifter. Then, if it was, I would perform a BG Performance oil change. Now, essentially, that is a high-tech flush with a really, really stupid name. But because that requires special equipment that you would not have, Quick Clean would be an okay do-it-yourself attempt, but certainly not as good as the Performance oil change. All right, now, this is from Lee. Lee says, hey, Pat, I still have a 15-year-old four-cylinder Nissan Frontier. That is an oldie but a goodie if I ever heard of one. I have done most of the oil changes myself over 15 years at 3,700 to 4,000 mile intervals. I will typically use the dealer Nissan oil filter or a Purelator auto parts store oil filter. With both of those brands, I have always had a block of oil, a blort of oil, leak out of the filter and down the side of the engine when I unscrew the old used filter. I had some other service done to my truck 4 months or so back, and it was due for an oil change, so I had the service shop do it. I told the service manager that I had a Nissan new in-box oil filter behind the seat, but he said his shop refuses to use any customer-supplied parts. Oh boy, what an idiot. Customer-supplied parts, I would gladly never, ever sell a part. You supply all your parts. Why? Because if I sell it to you, I have to guarantee it. If it is your part and I put it on, the only thing I'm guaranteeing is the labor. I don't have to guarantee the part. If it craps out and destroys your engine, hey, your filter, your problem. So, I don't understand shops that do stuff like that. Anyway, his shop uses Champ oil filters. When I did an oil change this morning and had to remove the Champ filter, I was ready to catch the expected blort of oil in the drain pan, but nothing. When I got the filter off, the center hole of the filter was dry. This is strange since I'm accustomed to sticking my pinky in the leftover oil from the center hole of the used filter and using my pinky to oil up the O-ring on the new filter. All right, so what's going on here? Well, I don't know. It could be that there's a check valve that kept that from filling up or something like that. We don't sell Champ filters, although we do get promotions on stuff like that all the time. I am told by some of my suppliers that this is a high profit line that you can buy cheap and sell high. I don't know that. I don't know if the filter's good, bad, or indifferent. I have never put one on a car. I have never tested one. I've taken lots of them off, but can't tell you if it's good, bad, or indifferent, whether it is something systemic as far as the brand is concerned, or if it's just a one-time problem, because every part, every manufacturer, everything that has ever been made, there will be some defects. Remember, I tell you all the time, if there were no defective new parts, there would never, ever be a need for a warranty on anything. Why do we have warranties? Because new stuff isn't always perfect. So that's, anyway, my goodness. All right, let's see, Wayne. 2002 Ford Explorer, 4-liter, single overhead cam. That's the engine that they used for a long time. One timing chain on the front, another timing chain on the back of the engine. Not their finest hour, although given good care. My son-in-law has one that is, I don't know, a couple 100,000 miles, and never any real major problems with it. Anyway, this vehicle starts a little hard. One must turn the key 2 and 3 and 4 times each time the engine turns over, 4 or 5 times before it starts. However, if I pump the accelerator once or twice, it starts faster. On occasion, I do smell gasoline for just a few seconds. Should I have the fuel pump tested? Does it have anything to do with the catalytic converter? I get about 19-20 miles per gallon. All right, now, first thing, Wayne, number one, pumping the accelerator on a fuel-injected car does nothing. Absolutely nothing. Now, the reason for that is that when you are dealing with an old carbureted car, what happened was, as you pumped the accelerator with the engine not running, you'd pump the accelerator, and the carburetor had an accelerator pump that squirted liquid gasoline into the engine, and the more times you pumped it, the more gas got squirted in, the richer the mixture, and lots of times you could overcome various problems by essentially flooding the engine that way. Or you could flood the engine and then it wouldn't start. Fuel-injected cars, all cars now, and for many, many years now, are fuel-injected. They do not have accelerator pumps, and pumping the accelerator up and down with the engine not running doesn't do anything. Nothing at all. All right, so what are we looking at here? Well, again, like the earlier one on the Caravan, more than likely we have a lack of fuel because this business of turning the key multiple times and then it starts. So, yes, I would check the fuel pump for fuel draining back into the engine. So, but as far as I say, this business of pumping the accelerator, doesn't do anything at all. That's just something that you have ingrained in your mind, and, it's old school, doesn't apply anymore. Now, there is one thing. Fuel-injected cars can sometimes flood because maybe they have a weak ignition system or some other problem where the fuel doesn't burn quite right, it doesn't start, it floods out. Then what you do is you hold the accelerator all the way to the floor. Don't release it. Got to be absolutely all the way against the floor. And that is what is called a clear flood mode. So in other words, that presumes the car is flooded, and when you put it in clear flood mode, it shuts off the fuel injection. Shuts it off. No more fuel going into the engine. And that helps, as the engine cranks, that helps the overabundance of fuel dissipate inside the engine. All right, we are going to take a break. We will be right back here on Goss's Garage.
Don't fall victim to "it looks good, therefore it must be good." Like when thump bump you're tapped by another car at a traffic light or in a parking lot. You get out and look, and being a good person, yeah, right. You just don't want the hassle of calling the cops and your insurance company. Plus, you don't even see a scratch, so you let it go. That could be a minor to deadly mistake. What you see is purely cosmetic, but hidden behind the cosmetics are safety systems. Those hidden parts absorb and dissipate energy, and they may have been damaged in that tiny bump. The problem is that unless you have energy absorbers and crumple zones checked, they may not protect you if your car is hit again in the same spot. Most safety parts are one-time use, and that first minor bump may have used up a portion of their effectiveness. Then, in an actual accident, they're only partially effective. For instance, the energy absorber may transmit more of the crash energy into the car and the people in the car. That could mean the difference between no or minor injuries or something worse, especially for young or elderly passengers. Even in bumps that seem like a total non-issue, take a minute to exchange information, then have the safety parts behind the bumper checked. It might save a life.
This is Goss's Garage with Pat Goss. Call the show now at 844-885-4677. That's 844-885-GOSS. And now, Pat Goss.
Hey folks, please subscribe to Goss's Garage on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook, and for more car tips, tricks, and money-saving ideas, visit goss-garage.com. All right, dear Mr. Goss, I have a specific question about your video, Engine, Coolant, and Oil Mix. Close to the end of the video, you say that a faulty crankcase ventilation system can cause slime on the dipstick. Please, can you explain in detail what happens in this case? Thank you, and kind regards from Austria. Eric. All right, well, Eric, what goes on here? Crankcase ventilation system. If you think about what happens inside an engine, there are gases and so on that are pushed past the pistons during combustion that go down into the crankcase of the engine. Now, these gases have moisture in them. They have acids. They have carbon. They have all kinds of stuff. This gets down into the crankcase. Now, as it goes in as fumes, it's the job of the crankcase ventilation system to pull those fumes out of the crankcase and then reburn them in the engine. That way you don't get all this contamination in the crankcase. But if the crankcase ventilation system, now you may know it as a PCV, today they're just referred to as crankcase ventilation systems. If that gets blocked up or ceases to function properly, all of these gases that are down in there, plus gases that come up from the hot oil and stuff like that, they stay in the crankcase. And the moisture that's in those gases condenses, and it collects on various parts of the engine, cooler parts of the engine usually, like the very top of the dipstick, which is sitting right out there in the open in the air most of the time. That difference in temperature causes the moisture to condense. Now, fumes still get up there, and the fumes combine, and they have oil in them, they're oily fumes, combine with that moisture, and if you take a little bit of oil and a little bit of moisture and you whip it up, you get this yellow snot-looking slime that is really pretty gross looking. And that's what forms as a result of this on the upper portion of the dipstick. Now you also typically see the same thing on the underside of the oil filler cap. It's this yellow slime looking mess. So that's why that happens, is because the crankcase ventilation system isn't pulling the fumes out of the crankcase, and what you're winding up with is moisture and so on inside the crankcase that condenses in certain cooler spots. So why on the underside of the oil filler cap? Well, usually because it's insulated from the metal around it with a seal or a gasket, or it's made out of plastic and doesn't conduct heat well, and so on. Mark says, Pat, I have a 2009 Mercedes C300 with a hard line going to the rear of the car to a soft line at the caliper that has a hole in it. Went to the dealer for replacement lines to do both lines going to the rear, and price was $300 just for straight lines, no labor. I thought they would be pre-bent. You're dealing with Mercedes. Come on, folks. Anyway, for that price, I figured I'd just buy straight lines myself from auto parts store and splice them in. I have a good Master Cool, I don't know what that is, hydraulic flaring tool, but do not know what size the line is. It should be metric and the line fits in the 4mm die, but I do not find any stores that sell 4mm. I can fabricate line to splice in, but don't know what size existing line is. Well, your Benz should have brake line, European standard, 3/16 of an inch. Standard brake line, just like most domestic cars have, and so on. Find it at any parts store. The things to look out for here, number one is that you get brake line, hydraulic brake line, not just steel tubing. You can buy steel tubing or you can buy brake line. Steel tubing is a fraction of the cost of brake line. Why? Because steel tubing is made in a manner so that it has a seam down than the rest of the line. So that means that the pressure exerted in panic braking could, not necessarily will, but could conceivably cause that seam where the sections of the steel tubing are bonded together, could cause it to rupture and you'd have a brake failure. Actual brake line is seamless. It's made in a different way. It doesn't have the seam down the side of it. And that means that it is much stronger. Now, a couple of other things. Number one, you don't normally splice a brake line. Don't put a coupling in the middle of it or something like that unless it is absolutely necessary. No conceivable way to get around it. And then you could do it, but make sure everything is done right. So you don't splice brake lines. Next is that the type of flare on the end of the line. You've got to know, and you have to have the proper tools. There are essentially three different types of flares. There's a standard flare, which is just the end of the line flared out. Then there is what is called a double flare. The double flare, they flare the end of the line out, and then there's a second step to it that folds the edges of that in so that it is now two layers of metal, one folded into the other one. That's a double flare. And there is a bubble flare. That's where the end of the line has a curve to it. It doesn't go down in a V, but it sticks up like a bubble. So you have to know exactly what type of flare you're dealing with, and you have to have the tool to make those flares because the tools are different on each and every one of them. So hopefully this works out for you. Ah, goodness, Donald. I have a 2017 Mustang GT. I'm thinking about getting rid of the resonator and putting an X-pipe, and what do you think with just about 9,600 miles? What do I think? Well, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish here. If you want it to sound a little bit better, go for it. Now, if you're looking for horsepower gains that you can feel, you won't feel anything, but might see something at the track in thousandths of a second. Most of these things, you know, they test them under certain conditions and they manipulate the numbers. The numbers are typically correct, but you're over 400 horsepower in that car. Now, if you look at those numbers and you think about it, in order to gain something that you would feel, if you have a 100 horsepower engine and you add 10 horsepower to it, that's a significant thing and you can feel it. But you take a 400 horsepower engine and add 10 horsepower to it, you don't feel it. You might have to add 50, 75, or 100 to really feel the difference. The higher the initial horsepower, the more you have to add to feel a significant difference. So it's, you know, granted, you know, they may give you a number and so on, and those numbers may be absolutely correct, but, you know, what you're going to feel inside the car may be completely different. So keep that in mind when you're buying performance parts for your car. But yes, it will make it sound better. There's no question about that. And what vehicle on the planet has a better sound than a Mustang? Well, maybe a Ferrari or something like that, but Mustang has a very distinctive sound, and it will be even better sounding with that X-pipe. All right, folks, the music says we have done it again. Thank you for listening. Thanks to Steve McMillan and George Stockton for producing today's show. For everyone here at Goss's Garage. Oh, and also thanks to Stevie McMillan, who is manning one of the computers in the control room. All right. For everyone here at Goss's Garage, I'm Pat Goss. Until next time, please, everybody, drive gently. We'll see ya.